Боже, царя храни, сильный державный.
Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast. I'm Joe, and with me today is the Zoo crew, Francis and Shocks. Liam is still in California, and I need to record episodes before I go to Armenia this weekend. So I have drafted them into the Hall of Horrors that we are creating here today. Hey, fellas.
I always appreciate doing a podcast where I'm not running it because that means that I get to smoke weed. Otherwise, I have to pay attention, and then, this is not going to work.
And I'm just really disappointed because I was told there was a Hall of Horrors, and I assumed it was some sort of like carnival ride. And instead, I got this bullshit. So
it's a carnival ride as long as you enjoy long walks through the mountains that
I was
are
hoping
mostly
for dark
one
carnival.
way. I feel like the Juggalos don't even want anything to do with this mess today. Now this is where I get to point out that you have had the joys of joining me whenever we talk about awful shit from World War One. Hasn't been planned that way. It just always kind of ends up that way, right? Like you were there for our Luigi Cadorna redo. You were there for Conrad von Holzendorf. So this is like the trifecta. I mean, obviously there is the World War Ones, like there's the Verduns and the Passchendaels and a few other ones. It's like the obvious glaring ones, but there's a few other battles that are so catastrophically stupid, and they change the way history plays out that people just don't give them the attention they deserve. And that's why we are talking about the Battle of Sarikamish today. Have you ever heard of this one before?
No, Sarikamish.
That's right.
See, I saw you named this, and I was trying to. You named it Sarikamish. Now I know how to pronounce it. I was just thinking it was Scaramouche, like
Scaramouche, Scaramouche,
exactly.
can you do the fandango?
I was excited to talk about Queen, but no, it's fine.
Yeah, that is the Battle of Freddie Mercury. It's the battle of what they did to poor Freddie Mercury in that fucking movie. But
I never saw it.
You did yourself a lot of favors.
I mean, Scaramouche also just kind of vaguely sounds like something I might like maybe an alternative form of the Reuben, or maybe like. But
it's a Reuben that doesn't quite care so much. Like
it's like sauerkraut, but different in some way. Like instead of like cabbage, you use
sweet
like,
kraut.
Yeah.
Oh God! I just made the worst sandwich ever. It's a Reuben, but instead of the sauerkraut, you have like the funny spaghetti candy on top.
Ugh.
Or like you put
some
like
sour worms.
You mix it in. You just mix it in with pixie sticks.
Oh. Now there's battles that happen throughout time that change the course of history. The Kursks, the Stalingrads, the Gettysburgs. And this should be included among them, but it's generally not. And I think the reason for that is because we are talking about two of probably the worst armies in World War One, and not to mention both of them would have some pretty serious other shit going on as soon as the war ended, in one case during the war. That's because this battle is fought between the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire. Two dying old ziggurats slapping each other with piles of dead.
So we're talking before, this is pre-Russian Revolution then.
Yes.
Like,
But it's like a fist fight in a hospice.
Yes. It's exactly what that is. And to be fair, you guys joined me on more than one episode about Russia, and generally it's where and this is where Russia fucks up. I don't say that at a single point, other than they're getting into World War One, but we're not going to talk about the Russian side of World War One.
Other than being Russian, just in general.
Other than being the Russian Empire, Russia didn't do anything wrong here.
Which is one of the few times you're ever going to hear Joe say that.
Yeah, and honestly,
really it takes fighting the Turks for Joe to say that Russia did nothing wrong.
This is one of those unique parts of history where the Russian Empire is
the heroes.
Is undeniably a force for bad things in human history, generally speaking. But World War One, they did more to stop the Armenian genocide than literally anyone else. So it's oh fuck, I kind of have to give you this one, right? They knew
We
it was
became
happening.
real assholes later, but I mean, in this one moment, I thought we were cool.
Like, legitimately, the Tsar did more for Armenia than almost anyone else. And it's like, it's the worst Tsar, right? Like, it's Tsar Nicholas II, who's a fucking idiot. It's like, and I mean, it's not because that he truly cared about Armenians. It had to do with him considering himself the protectorate of Orthodox Christians in the Ottoman Empire. But like, still, he helped. It's the Onion article where like, when the worst guy you know is right.
Was also I feel like it just kind of like a participation medal for not actively making the genocide worse.
Congratulations, you didn't do this one, guys.
Yeah, like it did a lot of ethnic cleansing, but this one not on your hands technically.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Good for you.
I mean, the same thing could be said for like the United States and helping stop the Bosnian genocide. Like, ooh, congratulations on this one, guys. Like, you did it.
You don't actually
use you in Rwanda, but you
don't actually have to go full Chomsky. You can actually give them credit for like not letting a genocide just continue.
You accidentally called it this time.
Yeah. When you roll the dice 20 times, I do like your odds eventually coming up on the right number. Now, the Battle of Sarikamish is probably, without a doubt, the most lopsided battles in all of World War One. And it is the small domino that would eventually lead to the Armenian genocide being committed by Turkish nationalists of the Ottoman Empire. No, that's this small domino, big domino. We'll get there. And I do understand that if anyone of like that say Turkish history or Armenian history, they're gonna be like, but Joe, you're leaving a lot of things out. You are correct. Eventually, I will have to cover the entire Armenian genocide. Today is not that day.
It's when Joe starts really heavily drinking and finally gives up all hope.
That's my secret. I'm always heavily drinking.
I've never had hope.
The people have always asked me, like, how do you study genocides for not only for your job here on the show, but also in school? That is, I'm dead inside. Now, to get to this point, we do have to figure out how exactly the Ottoman Empire joined Germany in such a badly thought out war in the first place. And as most people know, the Ottoman Empire was known at this point of history and a little bit before then as the sick man of Europe. Now, this can be debated when exactly this period started, but the Ottoman Empire had been formed all the way back in 1299. It was an old rickety shit bucket, and it was showing its cracks. And the period of decline, it's a lot like trying to point out when exactly the fall of Rome started, but on a much smaller, dumber scale. There's a lot of different points you can point out of like, oh, this is when the sick man era started. I'm not going to try to find it. But now, at this point, they were fighting nearly 40 years of constant warfare, trying to hold together their dying empire by the time World War I started. And they spent most of that time losing those wars. Ottoman Empire, early period, most like, the lustful Turk has conquered so many parts of Europe or whatever. But that era is long gone. The Ottoman Empire is not a military power to be feared in any capacity. Unless maybe you're Russia, who's equally incompetent. They just have more bodies. This is
both in a good way and in a bad way, usually.
I mean, like, to be fair, that was one of the Ottoman Empire strengths as well. It was huge. They could, I mean, at one point they controlled most of the Balkans. They controlled parts of the Middle East. It's Israel, or what is today Israel, Palestine, North Africa. It was very large. They could pull in a huge pool of manpower. But as they started losing these various wars they're fighting, to including losing most of the Balkans, Greece, and a few other places, those numbers would dwindle. And all of these wars, other than being sparked by the fact that being in the Ottoman Empire, while being one of these minorities, was kind of hard. The Ottoman Empire is considered a caliphate. So most of these people were Orthodox Christians, some of them Catholic, others, some other parts of Islam. They were living as what's known as dhimmi, which is like non-believers under Islamic law. You had to pay extra taxes. You couldn't have certain jobs. You couldn't enter the civil service unless you had connections. Like at one point, like there was an Armenian that was like the foreign minister somehow, even though legally he shouldn't have been able to hold the job. But like you had dhimmi were allowed to have very specific jobs. You were taken advantage of. Ottoman police, military could just just fuck with you for no reason. So, and this also coalesced together with a upswell of nationalism, which is the underlying cause of World War I in general, right?
Right.
So,
Isn't that the cause of most world wars?
yeah, normally.
I mean, a lot of wars either, I want your shit or I want you to go away, like permanently.
Yeah, I mean,
Compromising another nation to a permanent end.
you could thank you, John Cena. You could argue that nationalism causes most wars. That I think that's very true, but also very reductive. But yeah, for the sake of this, nationalism.
Well, and then
Now-
I mean, then also you get into like, what is actually a nation and what's a nation state.
Yes.
And so like, and then you get into like whether or not, certain wars can be called nationalism because is there really like a nation that they were a part of that, whatever. But
And you're going to get people that subscribe nationalism to not the bad things that we're used to here in the West.
Right.
And like, so when you try to say, like Kurdish nationalism or Palestinian nationalism or Armenian nationalism, like, that sounds like Nazi shit. Like, nope.
Yeah.
Not quite. Because, there's something to be said of an already powerful nation who already has nation states and borders compared to an oppressed people who want a secure and, state for themselves. So I won't really get into that.
weird. I just heard an Irish tin whistle off in the background there.
Now, and like, not to mention, a lot of this nationalism was born because of how awful the Ottomans were to them as a group. Like, they created an outgroup for themselves. If they simply like let them assimilate into the empire and into normal imperial life, a lot of this probably wouldn't have happened. But as one breakaway nation succeeded, others were like, "Hey, the Ottomans look kind of beatable right now." And in most of those cases, Russia's like, "I heard you needed help."
A thing that has never happened after that.
Yeah, of course not.
Just trotting behind like an eager dog. Just like, come on,
like, hey,
yeah.
and a
Want
lot
to
of
go
this
to
was
war?
like,
I got some guns.
a lot of this was guns, sometimes direct troops. Again, because Tsar Nicholas considered himself the protector of Orthodox Christians, which most of these groups were in various form or another. And by the 19th century, things were not looking good for the Ottoman Empire, and rightfully so. Fuck them. It's actually in my script. I wrote that. I'm going to be saying that often
To make sure that you say the Ottoman Empire, fuck them. You got to put it down.
I didn't want anybody to leave this episode without knowing how I felt. Now, as the Ottomans were dying,
A common complaint we get actually is not knowing exactly how Joe feels on a subject because he's just so shy.
right. Yeah. Now, as the Ottomans were dying, other imperial powers slid in to fuck with them and to steal their shit. This is most prominent with the French, the Russians, and occasionally the British for good measure. The French and Russians themselves did a lot of the fuckery, mostly because so obviously the French overwhelmingly Catholic, Russians overwhelmingly Orthodox. And then the Orthodoxy has various other smaller subsects, like you have the Russian Orthodox Church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Armenian Orthodox Church. All of these Russia didn't really see the point of differentiating them because, of course, they didn't. Like, no, all Orthodox, they're ours. Meanwhile, the French are like, no, all Catholics, those are ours. They have differing viewpoints, and at various points, the Ottomans themselves would consider via treaty the Russians to be the protectors of all Christians within their borders, to include Catholics and Orthodox, which of course would mean Catholics would be treated like shit by the people who are supposed to be treating all Christians better. And then at one point, the French would be made the protectors of all Christians within their borders and would favor Catholics, to include like Palestine and things like that. This is actually what led to the Crimean War. And it's as stupid as it sounds, I promise. I mean, that whole war started because the French did like gunboat diplomacy, and the Russians were like, "Hey, we're supposed to be the protector. What the fuck?" And then they invaded. So it's literally that stupid.
And I mean, it's an entire conflict where the best known battle in the entire conflict is like the Charge of the Light Brigade, which is just a bunch of like fancy British dandies just driving themselves into a bunch of cannons. So
Good news. That episode's coming soon. Now, while most of this is soft power grabs, like they didn't actually care about Catholics or Orthodox. They would have an in the Ottoman court, and if you happen to be one of these European protectorates, you could influence Ottoman policy. The Ottoman Empire is incredibly weak, and like we'll do whatever you say, just stop stealing our shit. Which of course allows them to come in more and more and just steal more of your shit with extra steps. This is just disguised as religious protectionism. The Christian population of the empire, like the Armenians, the Assyrians, the Pontic Greeks, were during all this point becoming the targets of frequent pogroms, as well as the Yazidis, but nobody ever did anything to protect them. Unfortunately, it would ring true until very recently, rather. Now, among Europeans, the situation became problematically known as the Eastern Question. The first time that question was ever asked, that didn't directly lead to a genocide. Because
nobody's ever said, how do we deal with blank question, and it been good. Now, it's not like, oh, how do we deal with the East question? Like, well, they're coming over at 9, so we should have a nice brunch spread set. It's never that. It's always genocide.
And it's also never like, how do we deal with the marshmallow question? Like it's always just a bad thing. Like, anytime you have national leaders discussing things in kind of vague general terms, it almost always is just like, well, there's a genocide.
Now, to be fair, the Eastern Question, as proposed by the Brits, the French, and the Russians, did not mean genocide. However, that didn't mean a genocide did not occur. Obviously, otherwise, I wouldn't have been born in Michigan.
And it doesn't mean that genocide wouldn't at least be one of the options.
Oh, don't worry, guys. It's fine. The British, the French, and the Russians are talking it out, and it's sure to be good for you.
Well, in this case, the question meant, how can we, what do we do with the Ottoman Empire? Like for the French and the British, the Ottoman Empire is very important, not because it had all of this land and minerals and other things that they could exploit within. That was also important. But they were also like the main thing stopping Russian expansion throughout the region was the Ottomans being there, which is why they fought so many goddamn wars. And having a buffer zone, effectively, it right there against Russia was very, very good for France and Britain. That means they didn't have to constantly fight wars. The Turks could do it. And not to mention, if another part of the question is, okay, if it falls apart, what do we get? Like, how can we divvy this up while also propping up bits and pieces of the Ottoman Empire as a shell of some kind to continue doing its job checking Russian expansion? That was the question. Unfortunately, by the time the question trickled down to Turkey, it did turn into genocide. In 3 different ones, actually. But yeah. Now, all of this happened at the same time as the Ottoman economy, which was always kind of in the shitter through its late stages, to crater just constantly. It was like going back, if I was to compare, it's like a Weimar Germany level economy here. Money is effectively worthless because the economy is tanking so quickly constantly, right? Now, this was fine for the Europeans. They didn't care so much because they could rope them in with debt diplomacy. Like, yeah, you can continue getting all your debt from us. It's fine. So, of course, soon the Brits, and mostly the French in this situation, would own massive quantities of the Ottoman economy. And these were debts that they knew they were never going to pay back because they couldn't. It was effectively a nationwide stock shorting. Now,
they're gonna load all the debt in, and then once Ottoman Empire closes, they're gonna put a Spirit Halloween in. This joke brought to you by my Toys R Us, which is now Spirit Halloween.
Now, this eventually led to the Europeans taking over the banks themselves, and effectively the entire Ottoman economy was kind of put in the same kind of situation, the same situation that Britney Spears is in, right? There was a conservatorship. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration was created and staffed entirely by Europeans, and it employed more people than the Ottoman Empire's own finance ministry, which honestly might have something to do with how badly the finance ministry was run in the first place. But rather than controlling the Ottoman debt, it really acted like a kneecapping loan shark. That they were in charge of any public spending by the Ottoman Empire. Like the Ottomans, like, oh, we kind of want to build like a road. Like, oh, you have money for a road, huh? You have money to pay your debts back.
I honestly didn't know that the EU started this early.
Now, each time shit went down, they were there to help them out. Mostly the British, because the British were more concerned about propping up the Ottomans, which is why the British got so heavily involved in the Crimean War, right? I mean, the French were also involved, but it was a huge British event. Now, this is obviously because the British are very, very interested in keeping the Russians in check. They didn't want to throw off the local balance of power. The British did not care about the Ottomans whatsoever. They just need to. You just need to be there and be like, you're my defensive line. I don't care about you as a person, though. Then there was the Young Turk Revolution. I'm not going to go into this too far. This eventually warped into the Committee for Union and Progress, which was another group within that revolution made up of hardcore Turkish nationalists that would depose the absolute monarchy and rule as a one-party dictatorship, effectively as like a triumvirate. But the Community of Union and Progress was a large dominating cell of the Young Turk Revolution, and I only point this out to be directed at a single news source. Any attempt to separate the two is historical revisionism. Moving on. As the Ottomans got more and more desperate, yeah, coming for you, motherfuckers. I don't care if you have an Armenian friend. As the Ottomans got more and more desperate, they decided to join in on the naval arms race that was sweeping across Europe at the time. Now, remember, of all of the problems I just listed, now they're like, we need dreadnoughts. Like, okay. It was a prestige thing. It was a prestige thing. Like, if we can compete with the rest of Europe, because the Young Turks did consider themselves European, as like a European imperial power. It's like, we need to compete with the Germans, the French, and the British. And the only way to do that is by building a big, dumb navy. Unfortunately, they had no money, right? So they asked for donations from the public. They crowdfunded battleships.
Sick.
Which they would then contract out to the British, considered the best shipbuilders in the world at the time. And by I mean donations, I don't mean like you chart in something a little bit small on the bottom of your tax form or whatever. They literally went around like hats in hand to ask people to throw in whatever extra change they had to make building this new navy possible. They were taken at cafes, at bars, at schools, and people who donated a lot were given a special badge as literally a participation trophy.
I mean, so hear me out on this one. So I know that Francis just created a new Patreon goal for a technical. As the resident boat person on the podcast, I think we can aim larger. I'm just saying, there's been a lot of decommissioned ships in the last few years. Like, I think they're getting rid of the LCSs. Like, I think we have some opportunities for some deals here.
We should.
I mean, this is just the first form of Patreon.
We should start our own pirate radio in uncharted water, or international waters. I don't know if pirate radio is still a thing that anybody gives a shit about, but
we should take over Sealand again.
Francis gets a little bit of money. He starts talking about international waters. All right, then, Jeff.
Oh, somebody wants to go 9 miles away from the shore. To be fair, I want to go nowhere away from the shore generally in any boat that's not a floating hotel. So
I'm generally the same. Yeah.
There's a reason I joined the army.
Yeah.
They don't go on the boats.
I like my feet solidly on dry land.
Thank God we don't collectively know anyone who joined the army and ended up on a boat regardless.
On boats.
Now, then the British entered World War I in August of 1914, which led to a thing. And now the Ottomans weren't involved yet. And they're like,
did you just yada yada over a genocide?
Nope, not yet. We're getting there. Genocide hasn't happened yet.
Just yada over like, and then it led to a thing. World War I.
Yeah, I mean, what is the most British way to describe World War I than a little like a thing, like a tiff? We had a waffle.
A spot of bother.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a spot of bother and lost 2/3 of our young people. It's fine though.
Yeah, we Brexited away an entire generation. Now This is very early on in the war. Ottomans aren't involved yet, but the British do have like, hey, we're building these ships. We'll just keep them. Like I know they paid for them, but like they're already here. We already built them. We'll just keep them. And then they did not offer any reimbursement to the Ottomans. This is what is widely known. Yeah, this is widely what's known in the business as a dick move. And also Grand Theft Battleship, I guess. I don't know.
This is the first like World of Warships. Like they just they upgraded by just like keeping.
Yeah, I mean they're like, we just got these old Turkish ships laying around. Why don't we keep them? Like, yeah, all right. Now, it wasn't such an easy thing for the Ottomans to be so mad, like, fuck you, we're joining the Germans, because that's not how that happened. Even though the Germans had been attempting to modernize the Ottoman army for quite some time, and they had slowly and surely built up a lot of influence over Minister of War Enver Pasha, who would kind of single-handedly get the Ottoman Empire in World War I. So while he didn't direct the future genocides as Minister of War, that'd fall under a different guy, the Minister of the Interior, named Talat Pasha. Enver Pasha is pretty much still responsible for all of it, because if World War I wouldn't have happened, I'm not saying it wouldn't have happened, but it would look a lot different. But this splits the new CUP revolutionary court into a pro-German and a pro-British side. Now, the pro-German side was always much stronger because Germany was always much more militarily involved in the Ottoman Empire, while the Brits had not a great track record. And, stealing their ships really put a damper on the pro-Brit side.
As it tends to do.
Yeah. Now, the reason that this wasn't so simple as fuck you or join the Germans, remember who the other German ally is, Austro-Hungary, who the Turks have a bit of a history with. The Austro-Hungarians have been nipping away at the Ottomans' heels. They've been fighting over the Balkans for quite some time, and not to mention they had just taken over Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was the Ottomans, and they had been fucking with them in the Balkans as well. So they're like, if maybe your friend wasn't such a dick, this would be a lot easier. Now, Enver Pasha reached out on his own, because he does this quite a bit, to the Imperial German court to ask for an alliance after the assassination of the Archduke in order to protect them from Russia when Russia inevitably entered this war that was coming. And the Germans effectively told them to fuck off. Germany didn't see the need or the use. They acted like the Ottoman Empire didn't have anything to offer, which, to be fair, they kind of didn't, other than the Bosphorus Straits, right? Like they were a very, very weak ally. And once the alliance was made, they were casually called a literal ball and chain around their ankle. Now, Talat Pasha wanted to side with the British.
Just doing old mother-in-law jokes, like out of the 1950s, but like with an entire empire.
Talat Pasha wanted to side with the British, but was also told to fuck off for the same reasons. Guys, we know about all your problems. We don't want to deal with them. We're all about propping you up with debt and stuff, but we don't want to actually be your friends. Now, the mood in the Ottoman Empire was kind of caught in the middle, all the way up until Winston Churchill, who was Admiralty of the Navy at the time, stole those ships without compensation. This 100% pissed off the Ottoman public, which, remember, paid for him. And that's when the court switched over to the pro-German side, never turning back. Now, weeks had gone by, and the situation in Europe had only worsened. Kaiser Wilhelm told his government to reconsider the Ottoman alliance on August 1st, and a secret defensive treaty was signed. The treaty forced Germans to protect Turkish holdings, but it only meant the Ottomans would actively enter the war on Germany's side if Bulgaria did, which would happen. Now, at this point,
as Bulgaria goes, so goes the world.
As many people say all the time, as Sofia holds the world by its heart. At this point, the Ottoman government was officially neutral, but that wasn't enough for Enver. He wanted the war. Remember, he'd gotten his way, kind of. He had brought his nation into an alliance with Germany, but he wanted more. He and the German ambassador wanted to bring the Ottomans fully and actively into the war. Enver saw it as the only way to prop up the dying Ottoman Empire, to snatch all this land back from Russia, which would, of course, restore their lost prestige as a world power, and that would magically knit all of these various different communities that hated each other back together.
We did it. We solved Balkan racism.
We did it.
A problem that would never, ever reoccur thereafter.
Yeah, he wanted to simply turn off the YouTube comment section. Even Talat believed that joining anyone in the war was the only way to save the empire. And it was like, honestly, Enver's very pro-Russia, or very pro-Germany, but they would have joined anybody willingly. They didn't care. There's like, no, we just need the war. We don't care about who we're actually fighting. We just need to we need a W here. We've been posting nothing but L's for hundreds of years.
A sign of a good foreign policy is just kind of like searching around, rooting around for a war like a fucking, kid looking for quarters underneath a couch cushion.
Yeah. Thankfully, that doesn't happen anymore.
Fuck.
Now, Germany didn't care so much about that. They at this point, they wanted Ottomans in the war to take the pressure off of them. Because remember, now they're fighting a two-front war. They're like, we need somebody to deal with this whole Russia thing off to our east.
The whole Russia problem.
Yeah. Now,
the Eastern problem, if you will.
Now, the other problem with that is, while Talat Pasha was 100% balls deep wanting to, go to war, like he wrote for, I don't know, The Atlantic or whatever, the rest of the government was pretty realistic. Like, no, we're not ready for a war. We can't do this. So Enver decided to work around that by simply starting it on his own. He conspired with the German foreign minister to take the decision out of the government's hands and do a little something called a false flag attack.
Oh man, some real imperial Japanese energy right here.
Yeah,
the fucking CIA did it. I knew it.
Yeah, 100 years before the invention of the CIA did it. Now, the Ottoman government purchased 2 German naval ships, and their German crews who remained aboard simply switched out uniforms. I assume they didn't stick out. Like, wow, look at those blonde-haired, blue-eyed fucking Ottoman sailors. Weird.
What a wild time to be doing war. It's just like, we're Turks now.
Yeah,
just that's it. We came with the boat.
No, you don't. You do not understand. We are simply blonde Kurds.
Yeah, nothing like a guy named Franz who just happens to be from Istanbul. I mean,
my name is Mehmet Dusseldorf.
I mean, all these guys eventually their descendants rat line their way to the United States and ended up in South America in various different places, including the last year in Haiti for no apparent reason.
Now, there's a problem with a lot of this. Obviously, as I point out endlessly. The Turks are broke.
No.
The Ottoman Empire has no money, so they couldn't actually buy these ships. It was all a lie. The Germans just said, yeah, we sold them, and the Turks were like, yeah, we bought them, and then signed paperwork, but they were actually still German. Like, all they did is do a quick clothes change like an episode of Scooby-Doo.
No, they're just doing supply chain financing, but for naval warships.
No, we built an entire shell company called the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, it's We Shell.
The rest of the Ottoman government began to get a little worried because Enver was doing this all without them. Like, weird. How'd you afford those 2 ships? Like, fell off the back of a truck. It was like my dad buying steak on every other weekend, right? Like,
the guy who once in the South End tried to sell me speakers out of a running car at a stop sign.
There's also those guys in Detroit, like, hey man, we got these really cheap speakers. You want to buy them? Those guys get a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, but it's one of those things where it's like, sir, you're not even in park. Like,
no, these speakers are going to combat roll out the back of this fucking van with no windows.
Like, I don't have a lot of standards in life, but like, even if it's a running car, I at least want it to be in park and not just like have the breakdown. Like, I don't know why. I'm squeamish like that in that way.
They call that the kidnapping stance. Now, while all of this is going on, the Ottoman government began to get a little suspicious as Enver began to say and do more dubious and inflammatory shit that angered the Russians and the British, including the things like opening the Bosphorus Straits to German and Austrian warships, and only their warships, which is in direct violation of various treaties as well as their status as a neutral nation. That is when he eventually ordered those two formerly German, but now kind of technically Ottoman ships into the Black Sea, which again was a violation directly, and it pissed off the Russians.
Oh, weird. They were going to go commit some war crimes in what you might call Blackwater.
Boo. Now, Enver told anybody who was kind of suspicious or worried about this whole thing, like, don't worry, it's only a training mission. But obviously, that's not the case. What really happened was Enver talked to the German ambassador of the German ambassador and the German commander of the technically Ottoman ships, and came up with a plan to provoke the Russians into attacking the ships, which would then force the Ottoman government to declare war because their ships are under attack. He would frame this as self-defense, making the Ottomans look like the obvious innocent party in the situation. Either it was lost in translation or the German commander did not give a single fuck about any of that. He was given a mission to start a goddamn war, and he went out and started a goddamn war. He just floated out in the middle of the Black Sea and shot at everything that was Russian.
You know what? I got to respect those vibes.
Yeah,
and like the bombardment really didn't do anything. Like there's like the Russians like, what the fuck, they're attacking us, and then like it was only two ships, and they immediately fucked off out of like immediate danger. Right now, as soon as this happened, everyone in the Ottoman government's like, God damn it, Enver Pasha just started a war. Nobody thought it was self-defense, but the British and the Russians declared war on them first because they were attacked, and then the Ottoman Empire declared war shortly thereafter. So Enver Pasha got what he wanted. Now, unfortunately for the Ottomans, it went sprinting headlong into a war with probably the worst army in Europe. Now, I say probably, I also said probably in regards to the Austro-Hungarian army. I probably also said that in regards to the Italian army. Very situational, which is the worst of the war. I will say, in my kind of educated opinion, the Ottoman Empire had the worst army of World War One. I mean, look at their shining track record. Now, the German army, like I said, had been trying to modernize the Ottoman military for years, and they largely failed to make a dent. The vast majority of the Ottoman military would be filled by draftees between the ages of 20 and 40, which isn't out of the ordinary, but what was the fact that they were one of the few developed nations on Earth that did not have a professional military education for its officer corps. Officer school did technically exist. However, it was more of a prestige thing, and it was largely ignored. Instead, people
that's always worked out well.
Sure has.
So, like, we're talking like worse than like German or English fancy boys just buying their way into commissions.
So, funny story about that. The Turks still did that, and the British actually stopped doing that during the Crimean War, or immediately after the Crimean War, because like, wow, all our officers suck.
I was going to say, because they had like some famous set of reforms that happened right after the Crimean War, right?
Yeah, it's a direct cause of, Now, the Turks should have known that, seeing how they were the British allies during the war, but, whatever.
All their losses did not, in fact, turn out to be lessons.
No. There was no Ottoman Center for Lessons that were learned here. Instead, people could simply buy their ranks and commission, though most of the time they were simply given to them as a gift, a favor. Maybe they were nobility or a high-ranking politician.
See, it feels more like a prank to me. Haha, you have to be a major.
You just got punked. You're an officer in the Ottoman army. God damn it, Ashton. How'd you get here?
Instead of leaving like a flaming bag of dog shit, it's just like a set of like lieutenant's bars.
I mean, that also is just lieutenants. Now, again, that was not super out of the norms. Say in like the U.S., we didn't directly sell commissions, but we just took the long way around, really. A lot of very fancy law boys ended up officers that a whole lot of professional education.
Weird. Glad we got rid of that.
Yeah. Now, in most places, to even buy a commission, you actually had to pass an exam or an academy before getting commissioned. Like even in the Spanish American War, which is really bad about this, of just like people throwing out commissions. Even like the lowliest lieutenants had to pass a paper test. Um, it didn't prove a whole lot, but at least you're literate.
You had some, you were said some idea of what was going on. You like didn't eat your pencil.
You immediately get sent over to the Marines if you did that. But like, there's always a classism element involved in the enlisted officer divide. And like we pointed out, this purchasing of commission system went out of favor after the Korean War and the British Army, which we'll talk about much more extensively when we talk about the Crimean War at some point in the future. But there was a staff college, and it was established in 1848. If you realize that is awfully close to when the war started, and that's hardly a good time to build a large corps of officers, you were right. Not to mention that these academies were just a clusterfuck of different nations and teaching styles that it never would have worked. So the one in 1848 was a French model, which was then closed and reopened a couple times, depending on the relations between the two. The British also opened a naval training mission, which failed to get much done. And the Germans opened their own 1899, which went through various changes until 1908.
Man, sorry, I just like struck at that being such a kick in the pants where the British open a naval training mission that don't actually give you the boats. Don't worry, guys, we promise. Like it's like Arrested Development, like promising you're going to take your son up to the cabin the next year, and it just like never quite comes.
There's always money in the Naval Academy. Now, again, this wasn't mandatory. Like, if you were a guy that had money and connections, you weren't going to spend your fucking time in a classroom. And since most high commanders, if you were to raise yourself up to become a corps or army commander in the Ottoman military, you're a politician or a noble. There's a few outliers here, but exceptions to the rule. Those people had no professional development or military education whatsoever, unless, of course, they had worked on other campaigns, and then it was like on-the-job training, which is not how you want to train an army. This also explains all of those wars they kept losing, which is also not a great way to learn on the job when all you're doing is losing. That certainly doesn't remind me of anything in modern times. Worse still, they had no native manufacturing ability and were completely and totally dependent on import for all weapons and ammunition, which they got from Germany and the Austro-Hungarians. Unfortunately, those modern weapons would be wielded by troops that had not been trained from various different ethnic backgrounds, many of which didn't speak the same language. If that sounds familiar from the Austro-Hungarian episode, you got it. Except it was way worse because there's even more languages floating around. Now, hypothetically,
were they at least not racist towards each other?
Oh God, of course they were.
Joe, I know they were. I wanted you to mention it.
Hypothetically, this is all supposed to be standardized, and the soldiers were supposed to learn how to speak Turkish. But this never actually happened. So
everything goes sideways whenever it's like, hypothetically, oh no. Oh no.
Well, it's a lot like the Austro-Hungarian thing. Like, no, you need to learn a couple command things so you can understand what your officer's telling you in Austrian or whatever. And then like some Hungarian guy's like, what? Like I don't understand what you're telling me. So Turks, various groups of Slavs, Greeks, Syrians, Kurds, Armenians, and Arabs would all end up living and working side by side. These are a few of
my favorite things.
Without really ever being able to communicate a lot of times. Now, sometimes people would pick up bits and pieces, but if you grew up in an Armenian village, probably spoke Armenian. You might know a couple words of Turkish. Same goes for the Assyrians, the Greeks, whoever. You probably knew bits and pieces. Not enough to have a fucking conversation. Now, like I pointed out, think of all of the problems with the Austro-Hungarians, fucking multiply it. Because this army is bigger, there's more ethnicities, there's more languages, and a significantly worse government. But that didn't stop Enver from having bold plans. The Germans wanted the Ottomans to open up a second front against Russia to distract them and pull soldiers away from their own Eastern Front problems. Enver didn't see this as a distraction, however. He believed that a campaign through the Caucasus would mean they would be able to retake the various lands that Russia had helped them lose or taken for themselves in the last various wars, as well as drive through Georgia and beyond. not that one. Eventually triggering a revolt of the Caucasian Muslim population. No, not that kind of Caucasian. Against their Russian Orthodox masters. I'm not going to teach. I'm not teaching everybody the difference in this one this time. Moving right along. This is it's the hell of a pipe dream for Enver, and Enver's a fucking moron. But that is exactly what he would attempt to do. He would slap together what is now known as the Ottoman Third Army in order to do this. The Third was not made up of the best troops in the army. Those had all been sent to Gallipoli to tend to the peninsula that eventually go on to own the British and Anzac forces. The Third was made up of mostly fresh conscripts and reservists who had been either too old to miss the initial conscription for whatever reason, or had survived previous conscriptions. They're not the ones you want. And Enver would, of course, lead the army himself, despite the fact he had never done that before. And all of the armies he ever had a command in, all of those wars, they lost them all. Certainly, like the cream's not rising to the top here.
I feel like this is a reoccurring theme of all the World War I episodes. You just watch kind of all the the pre-war fail sons who just show that they were just manifestly unable to handle any sort of large unit action, just continually get plugged into spaces where they were absolutely only just going to slaughter their own troops, and it seemed to never be a deal buster. It was kind of almost like
everybody just fails up.
Yeah, what did you do? Well, I used to I worked at 5 or 6 banks, and every single one got robbed, and every single time everyone else around me got executed. Oh, cool. Well, we're going to make you the branch manager.
Yeah, pretty much. Now, seriously, the man had a 0-2 record, and the only reason he was put in charge of this revolution, he's put in charge because he ended up being very close to the revolution, and it had worked. And then he was made war minister. This is like if the Detroit Lions tried to do a war, or us, I guess. Even though this army would be able to pull off repulsing the Russian failed Bergman offensive between November 2nd and 16th of 1914. He believed that because they had stopped the Bergman offensive, they would be able to carry out his offensive on their own. I guess nobody told him through his various experiences that defending is a lot easier than attacking. But whatever. He dreamed big, and hilarity did not ensue. So he came with a plan for the Third Army to advance into the Allah Akbar Mountains. Yes, those mountains, to encircle the Russian army at Kars and slowly crush them. To anyone who doesn't know anything about this battle, this seems like a pretty straightforward plan. Encirclement is a tried and true military technique that a skilled attacker could use against a defending army. It's literally textbook shit. But
do we have a skilled attacker?
Well, no.
I also feel like most of the time that the attack involves the phrase "through the mountains."
That's what you call a clue.
Yeah, that's that. And once again, I'm a dipshit. I know really only about water and boats. But even from what I've read about land, seems like mountains are hard. I don't know if either one of you can speak on that.
Yeah, it's you don't want to do that through mountains.
Yeah, you don't want to do anything through mountains.
Yeah, it seems like a bad time. Anytime I ever read about 10th Mountain folks, seems like they're having a bad time.
I will say that this is the part where I get to say this is where it gets worse, because there's a lot of small problems at play. One where the mountains were 9,000 feet tall and were full of nearly impassable trails and gorges, and at an altitude where none of the Ottoman soldiers would be prepared for. None of them are from this region. None of them are from the mountains. They were all from the highlands and the cities. The second problem was the Ottoman army had no means of communication to organize its soldiers, and Enver would have to be deploying 3 separate groups of soldiers into battle to complete his encirclement with no way for them to communicate. Problem. Yeah. The third problem was Ottoman infrastructure was dog shit across most of the empire, and even worse in the Ottoman East. They'd built a single line of rail, and most of the roads were dirt tracks, while Russia had a fully functioning railway going through the same area. This meant that the Ottomans would not be able to resupply their forces, while the Russians would pretty much be able to do what the fuck they wanted at will. One of the Ottomans on the Ottoman side all of the trails that were treated as roads going to the direction of Sarikamish and Kars would be completely unusable for artillery, even in the best of times. But this would not be the best of times.
I was going to say, like, also famously, dirt tracks and trails get so much better after the first 10,000 people who trod down them.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it was during our Napoleon invasion of Russia one where they literally created a dust storm because they were marching in dirt, probably the same fucking dirt tracks. I don't know. Now, here's the fourth problem. The entire operation would begin in fucking December.
Perfect. The only thing better than attacking Russia and then it turning into December is just starting in December. I've heard.
We're not invading Russia during the winter. We'll simply begin in the winter. Now, in this area, temperatures would drop to minus 20 degrees, even at low altitudes. Unfortunately for soldiers of the third, minus 20 would be a high during this period. That also meant all of those roads, which were hardly able to be used in the first place, were rendered completely useless due to snow and ice. Now, Enver...
I mean, at least I assume that they had sufficient winter clothing and good food.
Oh, boy.
Carrying commanders, like reasonable objectives, considerate, timetables that were, calculated based on the difficulty of the terrain involved.
I will give you this much. There are timetables. That's the only part about that they do have.
Or were they reasonable?
No, not even a little bit. Now, Enver was a fucking idiot, but his corps commanders under him were not. At least not to the point they're like, we cannot do this. This will kill all of us. So they were all fired and replaced. Now,
you know what? You know what? That sounds like fine. I'm fired. Like you all go die, I guess.
I mean, as I used to say to some of my superiors in the Coast Guard, like, all right, send me home. Yeah, I'll just send me home. I'll think about what I did. I'll wear a dunce cap. I'll sit in the corner, and you go save the day. Go save the day by yourselves. It'll be fine.
Yeah, the Ottoman Corps commander is like, oh, I'm so owned that I got fired. I guess I'll just head on back now. Bye.
I guess I'll just continue living.
Yeah,
I'm gonna put on my really warm coat and go back to my wife. Yeah, you all have fun. Take care.
Some lieutenant colonel's like, why am I getting promoted? It's best you don't ask. Oh man. Now, the march officially began. Sorry, go ahead.
Just like 2 weeks beforehand, boy, man, the chances for advancement in this army are just aren't there. And just like off in the distance, a monkey paw curls.
Good news. How'd you like to be a general? Don't ask what happened to everybody else above you. Sir, I graduated last in my military academy. I didn't even go to one of those. Don't worry about it.
What do you call the guy who graduates last at his military academy? General. All right. Have at it, buddy.
Minister of War. Now, the march officially began on December 22nd, and things immediately went to hell. Ottoman logistics were so bad that most soldiers lacked any and all winter clothing, to include boots. Now, I don't mean winter boots. I just mean boots. Many of them marched with rags wrapped around their feet. And most units marched out with only enough rations. And by rations, I mean a literal fistful of bread and some dry olives.
Yes. I mean, they were just, they were just cutting out all their fats. They were just doing kind of an Atkins thing.
Yeah, like all of their fats, all the way down to the bone.
The bone of their own skin. Yeah.
Oh, I could really go for, I don't know, 5 or 6 more almonds. Now, facing them would be the Russian Caucasus army, a much better equipped, prepared, and led army. And that's a low bar when it comes to Russia. They were reinforced by several volunteer units made up of various ethnicities that the Ottomans had spent the last several decades or hundreds of years murdering and oppressing, like Armenians, Greeks, and Georgians, who had fled to Russia for protection and now saw a chance to get the revenge. Now, these units, there weren't that many of them. There was actually just a lot of these guys already in the Russian military because there was populations of them living in Russia. The The number of volunteer regiments is vastly overblown by modern day Turkish historians. It was a couple thousand people at most. And in the grand scheme of things, in World War I, a battalion or so is not a whole lot to ascribe a lot of difference to. That's like casualties that can be churned out in 15 minutes. You know what I'm saying? Like, anyway, pretty much. As soon as the Ottomans began marching, they started getting lost and losing contact with one another. They engaged the Russians in various skirmishes on their way to their ultimate target, but none of these battles were anything of importance. And to the surprise of, I assume, only Enver, they got caught in a continuous blizzard, because that's what happens when you send your soldiers marching through the fucking mountains in December.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's really like, unless you're like in Australia, there's not a lot of good times to like, attack anything in December.
It's like, sir, have you heard of weather?
Right. Does anybody know, like, did you ask anybody who like lives in the mountains how this? No, nobody's gonna know anything about the terrain. That's fine. No, you don't need shoes, buddy. It's fine. Let's go.
I mean, I assume the mountains go higher, so I assume the temperature does as well. I will not be looking into this further.
Now,
it must get warmer because you get closer to the sun.
Yeah. You get closer to God. You can hear your prayers, and you'll get warmer. It's fine.
Somewhere, Enver is just like drawing a picture of him going up a hill closer to the sun. Like, guys, I figured it out. I figured it out.
You looked at one too many like third grade children's drawings of the sun being like, just like this like warm glowing orb close to the ground. He's like, well, if we just go closer to the sun, it'll be warmer. I don't know why he's a news announcer of the 20s, but it's fine.
The Enver glancing down at this like child crayon drawing, like, weird, the sun doesn't even have a smiley face. I'm starting to think my map is incorrect. Different Ottoman units got so lost and confused that by December 23rd, two different units began shooting at one another. The 92nd Regiment and the 31st Division opened fire on the 32nd Division. Neither of them had any idea who the others were and assumed the other were Russian. Their firefight went on for 4 hours and killed thousands of their own men before someone finally managed to get them to stop.
I imagine, too, like they probably also didn't like speak the same languages.
No, there's definitely a lot of disconnect in there. Bad leadership, scared people, nobody being able to understand one another. It's
just like good. A dude who speaks Greek, you're like, I don't know, it's Russian. Fucking shoot him.
Get that motherfucker. He's trying to steal my baklava. Now, in case anybody's keeping track at home, this is day 2. Thankfully or not, depending on who you are, I guess, pretty much every Ottoman unit got separated from one another. Many didn't have maps, and for the ones who did, the snow and terrain made marching on the tracks and the maps completely impossible and also hard to tell where the hell they were. A little detail like that did not stop the Ottoman commanders from forcing their soldiers to march against blizzards for hours at a time. A few units made it through 47 miles of this bullshit by day 3, which was still behind schedule because at this point, Enver's timetable had them covering double that. Here's your timetables. By the 25th, soldiers had been marching to the point of not giving a shit. And I'm not injecting that. It's not hyperbole. Between snow and Russian harassing fire, they were described as by one of their corps commanders as, quote, indifferent to their fate.
I mean, you're just waiting for death at that point.
Yeah. At this point, you're just appropriating Russian culture. This was noted after being forced to march 14 straight hours through the snow. Now, the Ottomans were hoping that the Russians would square up and fight them, but the Russians were much smarter than that. Why do I need to fight you? You're clearly killing yourself. Now, they did engage the Ottomans occasionally, but they fire off some rifles, machine gun nests here and there, and then they just displace once the Ottoman commanders finally managed to get their troops in order to order them into some form of organized defense or attack. It was hit-and-run attacks. But that reaction time got slower and slower as more troops began to get sick and die from the cold or lose body parts from frostbite. For people unaware, your brain doesn't work right when you have hypothermia. You're pretty much drunk.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why they say that, like, if you like if you fall into like cold water or something like in a pond or whatever, that it's like a good death because essentially you just like feel vaguely drunk and just kind of like let yourself slip away at that point.
It's the same reason why a lot of people dying of hypothermia are found like stripping off their clothes.
Yeah, like you just kind of like lose all sense of yourself and just kind of like, yeah, just let the elements take you. All I'm imagining is just a bunch of Russians fire off machine guns and then just accusing them of the Turks of cultural appropriation and then running off.
Take cover. Fuck this. I'm jumping. I hope one of them catches me. Now, if all of these things couldn't be made any worse, enter typhus. Now,
that's my least favorite wrestler.
Now, for people who maybe are new to the show and haven't heard us talk about this, having 100,000 dudes camp out together in small camps in the early 1900s is a recipe for disease. It still kind of is today, but at least we understand how to stop the spread for the most part. Clearly, we're not very good at listening to that advice, as the last 2 or so years would tell. But typhus had been ripping through the ranks since the march had began. And now that they're about a couple days in, it was really starting to take hold. Now, the typhus causes nausea and uncontrollable diarrhea. So people were just like freely shitting and vomiting on themselves as they were marching. Just put yourself in their shoes. Just liquid shit freezing to the inside of your legs, bonding to your uniform pants like a giant poop scab.
I don't want to think about that.
That's actually the name of my new metal album. Poop Scab. The Poop
Ladies
Scab
and gentlemen,
EP.
or Poop Scab.
I mean, if you want to reenact this, you can go to like North Dakota this winter and take a certain horse dewormer, horse antiviral, and just let some rope worms go, and you'll have fun.
And every step, it's like getting torn off of you, and everything is like their beards are freezing to their faces. People are going snow blind. Everyone just covered in poop. That's like the one through line through military history. Like they're probably pooping on their like all of the most heroic battles, like pre 1915 for the most part. Everybody's covered in their own shit.
It's like you don't really get a lot of like when you see the you get like Crusader like Christian supremacist Twitter,
sloshing around in their armor full of shit and piss.
Yeah, and it's like you don't realize that like when you're posting this picture of like this brave Crusader soldier in his armor, and it's like he's just out in the middle of like Palestine in 90-degree heat, just sloshing around in his own shit.
Yup.
The brave Confederate soldiers, no man, they're bravely shitting themselves, but so are the Union one.
Yeah, that's fine. Everybody's just passing typhus and dysentery back and forth.
On the positive side,
it's mostly caused by like contaminated drinking water with fecal matter. Yeah. So like everybody's like literally shitting to the point that everybody else is shitting, and then they're spreading it around. It's great. I love history. It's mostly poop.
On the positive side, at least here for the Union soldiers for that one, at least your uniform's like a dark blue. I feel like that's gonna hide the shit stains a little bit better than like a light gray. I mean, and really that's what history is really about. Is just
this is why like the redcoats went with red so they wouldn't see the blood on the officers. This is why my army all wears brown pants. I can't tell I'm shitting myself. Now, by December 26th, thousands of soldiers were already dead from friendly fire and hypothermia and typhus, and they haven't even reached the worst part of the mountains. The Russians had begun to send in thousands of reinforcements by rail, quickly filling in the gaps in their line that would have allowed Enver's encirclement to actually work. Not that Enver actually knew about them in the first place. Instead, the Russian left and right flanks filled out, stopping the Ottomans from completing their goals of encirclement and attacking the city of Sarikamish. And at this point, the Ottoman field commanders, the replacements, finally broke down, telling Enver there is no fucking way we can actually launch an attack. Like, we're all dying. I have lost my eyelids. Like, I don't know.
Like my ass is actually frozen to my feet, and like I can no longer see, and I no longer fear death, and in fact embrace it. So
my adjutant died a week ago, and I just keep his frozen corpse around to hold my maps.
Oh fuck! It's like a fucking sword swallower. You just use them as a map case.
Now, of course, these guys were all fired and replaced once again. These guys were not allowed to go home because they were dying on the mountain. That didn't mean that like Enver was going to stop. Like, there was no rational reason that Enver was going to stop this attack, or it never would have started. If he could have taken a fucking clue in the first place, he would have stopped when the first bunch of corps commanders like, yo, man, no, this isn't going to work. So instead, like, the brilliant brain genius that he is, he ordered an attack on Sarikamish to begin right away on December 29th. As you can imagine, this attack went terribly. 12,000 Ottoman soldiers rushed into the city, with about 300 surviving long enough to break through, causing them to immediately realize, oh dear God, where did everybody else go? And they turned around and ran back to their lines.
I'm sorry, they sent 12,000 and 300 survived.
Survived long enough to break through the Russian line to then run for their lives and get shot in the back.
That is a fucking meat grinder. Like
this is the junior Whopper to the big Whopper meat grinder.
Yeah, this is before like you just had like what we had. Like anybody, you can get an automatic weapon and shoot it into a big crowd of people and takes like in the like a 240 Bravo or something. Like you're doing this with like some World War I shit, man. You got to be dedicated to killing.
I mean, they have Maxim machine guns and stuff like that. You just pull down the trigger and wipe out an entire division or whatever. And like, to be fair, it's one of the reasons why in this era and before that, one of the most important parts of any army was not your skill, it was discipline, because you had to sit there and just get massacred and not run away. That was like when people talk about skilled veterans, it was like, oh, we know those guys won't run away. When everybody starts getting shot in the face, like that was a skill that they had. Was like, I don't care. I'll run directly at that fucking bitch. I'll smother the barrel with my guts.
So just choosing death is really what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, because like being up until, I mean, and depending on what army you are in, your experience today is still pretty awful. But like, being a soldier is bad, so people are pretty fine doing horrible, not well thought out things like, I don't know, running at a machine gun. Like, I just want to be over. At least I'll be warm.
It's like, well, I haven't gotten paid in 6 months. My family's definitely forgotten about me. I have an incurable form of syphilis that I got from the unclean person I last slept with when I was in town. The last 3 meals I've had have definitely like most of the protein has come from maggots, and I have just like a shit icicle just hanging out of my ass. So frankly, at this point, I would. And I would kill myself, but I can't quite reach the trigger with my toes. So I guess I'm just going to run at
my
that.
Toes to frostbite.
I've lost three out of the 5 toes on each foot to frostbite, along with like 2 out of the 5 fingers on each hand. And and like not only is like do I have a shit icicle out my ass, but also my beard is somehow frozen to my chest and I vomited on it. So really, at this point, I'm just going to run at a maximum machine gun, because if a machine gun cuts me in half, that's going to be the least amount of like pain and humiliation that I felt in the last 8 calendar months.
Hey, Sarge, my typhus is meeting up with my syphilis. I don't know what to do. Just let him hang out, Billy.
They're doing the Dragon Ball spirit touch.
It's like
doing the fusion dance across your brain.
It's like Pokemon, but you've just like collected every like pre-1940s illness. Like
it's the Mr. Burns sketch where all of the viruses are trying to press through the door. But on the other side of the door is an angry Russian with a machine gun. Come on, motherfucker, I dare you. Now that 12,000 wasn't even the worst part about it. In the end, 50% of the entire Ottoman force was destroyed while attacking. When Enver ordered another attack on the new year, 40% of those didn't even make it to the point of attacking because they were wiped out by a freak snowstorm.
Oh, fucking Christ. Like, also, just like imagine like having to walk through that afterwards as like one of the survivors. Like you're just like walking through this like terracotta army of all of your former like all of your other former like peer soldiers, and they're just like, oh well, I mean, I guess at least he got frozen upright, so at least like the shit icicle didn't go up his ass as he died. Like
the Russians actually wrote about finding after the battle they didn't realize how big it was. Like they didn't realize it was the entire third army of the Ottoman forces that attacked them, and they reported finding just piles of tens of thousands of frozen corpses that they didn't even fight. Like, what the fuck, guys? I found more bodies over here. How many people attacked us? No, those guys all died around a fire.
I thought our sergeants hated us.
Yeah, it's exactly.
The one time that the Russian army actually underestimated the amount of casualties that it caused.
Yeah, they'll never make that mistake again. Now, by the second, not even an entire full week into the offensive, Ottoman forces were spent. They were done. Between taking horrible casualties while attacking, getting annihilated by freak snowstorms, or shitting themselves to death, they simply had nothing left. That is, of course, when the Russians decided to launch their counterattack. The Ottoman flanks folded immediately. It was in the opening exchange of gunfire, an entire division surrendered. Fuck this. Just fucking do I'm doomed.
Yeah, I'm out, man. Wait, if I put down my gun, can I have shoes?
Or will you shoot me? Because that's honestly better too. Either way.
And then the Russians drove forward and completely encircled what remained of the Ottoman Third Army, hitting them with the old historic Uno reverse card. Now, while some units of the Ottoman Third Army fought like hell, the vast majority of them did not. They completely fell apart. Russian commanders wrote that they were overwhelmed by the amount of POWs that they encountered. Now, this by the time that the Russian army was pushing in, the army headquarters itself was taking fire, confused as to where the fuck all of its soldiers were, and they were all surrendering dead or running as fast as they could. At this point, the Ottoman headquarters, the people inside, let's get the fuck out of here, and they ran for their lives too.
Just running past your commanding general while saluting in full sprint.
I don't have to outrun you. I just have to outrun the Russians. Now, by the 6th, it was obvious that all was lost, and those that could dropped their weapons and ran for their lives. But small pockets of Ottomans, either because they had no idea a retreat was ordered, because a general retreat was ordered, but there was no communication system, total breakdown of unit cohesion. So a lot of units just didn't know that there was a retreat. So they sat in place and realized oh, I'm all by myself. Some of these dudes just shot themselves. Others surrendered. Some dudes physically couldn't run, all of the frostbite and disease. And bits and pieces of this resistance last until the 17th. But pretty much on the 6th, the battle's over. 7th through the 17th is what you call mopping up. Now, the price that the Ottomans paid in just 3 weeks of combat was, I know we always talk about high casualties for World War I, but even World War I, this is insane. I guess remember, this is the first year and some change of World War I. This is before the full horrors of this war would fully set in. So the entire Third Army was destroyed. 90,000 people were dead. 50,000 of them died before they even saw combat. The Russians claimed they found 30,000 corpses frozen to the sides of mountains in various different places. Another 7,000 to 10,000 were captured, and the same number wounded. That meant if you got wounded, you probably didn't make it.
Yeah, where are you going? Where are you getting medevaced out of the mountain?
You just freeze into the side, yeah.
Right.
You're becoming like the green boots guy from Mount Everest.
I was just about to say, or any of the rest of it is just known by whatever you were wearing at the point that you froze to death on the side of the mountain.
Yeah. Make sure if you're climbing the mountain, make sure you take a left at the 30,000 dead Turkish soldiers. That's how you know you're on your way to the top.
You'll start hearing angry Russians. No, they're not mad at you. They're mad that they have to move all these bodies out of the way. This meant outside of some staff officers, almost none of the original 118,000 soldiers that set out made it back on their own. Of the people that made it back, almost universally, there were people who ran on their own. There was no during the Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, it was said that most people that survived that horrible situation survived because they stayed in their units, and that unit cohesion, kept everybody together. You could share food, you could share warmth, whatever. Not the case here. The only people who made it just fuck this, I'm out.
Like everyone who just was out for their own shit. That was the only thing. Like, which was like really, because I remember that series on the Retreat from Moscow, and like talking about how it was like, that was the only way that you were going to be able to scavenge enough supplies and whatever else. And it seems like here is just literally being involved with the Turkish army, like the Ottoman army in any way, was just a fucking death sentence.
Yeah. And this was a multi-ethnic army. Like there was Turks, Greeks, Armenians, whatever. At this point, most of the minorities are dead. This is because there wasn't that many of them. Two, the Turks always used minorities in like frontline combat situations, kind of something like the Soviets would eventually do. Burn through your minorities before you hurt the ones that you like. So by this point, the 18,000 stragglers, almost universally Turkish, they coalesce back together under a corps of officers, and then they immediately begin plundering their way across Armenian villages, stealing and raping people. For reasons nobody knows.
You only get to do that when you're victorious, man. You don't get to be like the losers and then go sack a place. Like,
and it's their own towns. Like, so this is the Ottoman Empire. It's like if, like, I don't know, like the U.S. Pulled out of Vietnam and then just invaded, I don't know, fucking Columbus. Fuck you guys. Now there was this is in the world of genocide speak. This is disorganized violence. This isn't that's coming. This is the disorganized program. But Enver made it back unharmed. Of course, he never really put himself in harm's way. He was always miles away from any real danger. And if botching an entire operation and getting over 100,000 or around 100,000 people killed bothered him, he didn't let anybody see it. Louis Einstein, who was an American diplomat in Constantinople at the time, recalled, quote, "Even when he returned from the Caucasus, where an entire army had been lost by his fault, he seemed perfectly happy and went that evening to a concert."
Sure. Fucking Christ.
Now, while inarguably this is 100% Enver Pasha's fault, he would accept none of that blame. Instead, he blamed it all on the Armenians. Now, he wasn't alone here. A lot of this falls on Talat Pasha, Jamal Pasha, the entire government, of framing the Armenians as something known as a fifth column. I was
going to say, was it, because it feels like there had to be a stab in the back narrative that, kind of drove this from this point forward.
There's the Hamadan massacre and things like that. There was other racist attacks against Armenians leading up to this point. There was a lot of propaganda, a lot of the work, like some shit you'd see in a couple decades in Nazi Germany. Race science and things like that came out. Some of it was religious, most of it nationalist. The CUP, or the Committee of Union Progress, was intensely nationalist. They wanted to completely Turkify the empire. They didn't see any place for the minorities, which is why eventually the Pontic Greeks, the Assyrians, the Assyrians, all of them would eventually fall under genocide as well as the Yazidis. But the Armenians went first. Now, he blamed and claimed that the Armenians fought on the side of the Russian military. The Armenians within the ranks of the Ottoman military, which fought and died in the frozen mountains alongside everybody else, were spies. The Armenians within the Third Army revolted, and that's why they lost.
It was Antifa the whole time.
Sure, yeah.
Armenifa? No,
now, Enver wasn't demoted because, of course, he wasn't, right? He didn't take any blame. The government didn't blame him at all, even though everybody was like, what the fuck did you just do? Despite this making no sense, the official government line became the Armenians did it. Not to mention, most of the people that could have pointed out that he was lying were dead. That small fact. Now, almost immediately after the battle, by February, Enver and Jamal Pasha would begin talking about and laying out the ground plans to deport all of the Armenians in the empire to the Syrian desert to die. The fact that the Russian Armenians that fought on the side of Russia were not Ottoman citizens, and therefore they couldn't betray a foreign government, did not matter. There were millions of Armenians living within the Russian Empire, as the historic Greater Armenia, which encompassed roughly half of modern day Turkey, had been cut in half for about a couple hundred years, with the eastern portion, what today is roughly the Republic of Armenia, controlled by the Persians, who then lost control of it in the early 1800s in the Russo-Persian War. There's absolutely no shortage of Armenians who are not subject of the Ottoman Empire. Neither did the fact that tens of thousands of Armenians were faithfully serving in the Ottoman Empire, both during and after the battle. And elsewhere, while other minorities were taking up arms in various independent struggles, Armenians had taken part in the Young Turk Revolution. Because in the beginning, it was supposed to be a secular revolution that would treat everybody the same. They would be able to get rid of their status as a dhimmi. They were quite literally working within the system for progress. And Armenian political leaders even encouraged their men to enlist and show the empire how dedicated they were to the Ottoman cause. By February, all non-Muslims in the Ottoman army were disarmed and sent to labor battalions, where they are all systematically murdered. During the same time, mass murders of Armenian citizens continued to become widespread. Any weapons and even religious items found within an Armenian home were used as evidence for these people's supposed role in the betrayal in the East in a popular uprising. Today, Turkish historians will point out that this is an armed Armenian rebellion. If you ever come across one of these people, they will explain that they were casualties of war and they were an armed rebellion. This is not true. There's idea like it is the theory of the fifth column becoming real. Now, historian Taner Akam, who himself is a Turkish historian, who has had to flee his home out of the Republic of Turkey for his research into the Armenian genocide, concludes that, quote, the allegations of an Armenian revolt in the documents in the Ottoman archives have no basis in reality, but were deliberately fabricated to further genocide. When in reality, all of these things spiraled out of control pogroms. Armenian leaders were telling Armenians not to shoot back, worried that even acts of self-defense would be given as more of a reason for their slaughter. It did not matter. On April 24th, 1915, on the orders of Talat Pasha, hundreds of Armenian political, intellectual, and community leaders were arrested in Constantinople and across the entire empire. Political organizations were shut, and Armenians who hadn't been deported from their homes were forced out into the middle of the desert to die. And that is why we commemorate the Armenian genocide today on April 24th. And Turkey can suck my fucking dick.
Fuck them Turks.
And that's like one of the reasons why I always knew about the Battle of Sarikamish, studying history, mostly because of the casualty counts, right? Like most people, when military history is taught, you don't get taught like the macro outside the battle. Like, what does this battle cause? You know? And I honestly, it's like outside of like this surrender of Kyiv during World War II that directly led to the Babi Yar massacre, it's really hard to find a battle that leads to like more direct human misery, you know?
Yeah, because I mean, just like from my own perspective, thinking about like the Battle of the Boyne and shit like that, like, you know, that's, you know, kind of the low point for like kind of like Irish nationalism and like the point at which, you know, like the British effectively took over Ireland. And even then is like, you know, it's a little bit more like attenuated and doesn't directly lead as much to like, you know, immediate genocide.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's political. Like normally genocide is made in a political atmosphere, right? Like you don't normally see it framed in a military capacity like that, even though military weapons and equipment and people will be used for it. Rarely do you see it like evolve from a direct military incident.
Right. Like this is kind of like putting the cart before the horse rather than the other way around.
Yeah, and this was not the only incident. This is not an exhaustive history of the Armenian genocide, and I highly recommend anybody go and read literally any of Taner Akam's books. He's a great historian. But like, yeah, it's definitely like middle domino. It's not small domino, big domino. We're a middle domino here, but like it's always interesting seeing how these things work at a very small scale. Now, on a less incredibly depressing note, I know we've gone a little bit long, but we do something on this show called Questions from the Legion. If you'd like to ask us questions from the Legion, donate to the show. $1 will do. Send us a Patreon question. Hit us up in the Discord and we'll answer it. What is your favorite dumb military superstition?
The charms was always
I was going
my
to say
favorite.
that too. Yeah.
I don't know why, and of course they went away in like the I don't know the aughts or so, but of course their older MREs were still floating around. But yeah, that's always been that. And there was something about an apricot with somebody with some they're like obviously not tankers, otherwise Joe would be saying something. But there are like dumb little things, and there's something with an apricot for some group. But yeah, the charms was always my favorite.
I vaguely remember something to do with apricots as well. I would ignore that anyway because I fucking love apricots. But the charms things jumps to mind immediately because I came in right as they were being faded out. Now, for people who never eaten an MRE, and bless you, charms are like shitty little candies. What would you compare them to?
They were like shitty lifesavers.
Yeah, it's fair. Shitty lightsabers. And if you brought them on your vehicle or whatever is considered incredibly bad luck, you'd get yelled at and people would make you throw them out. I saw it happen. Like, I don't think I ever had to throw mine out or anything like that. But like, if you didn't eat them, that was good enough. But if you ate them on the vehicle, fucking run. Like, people will just bitch and complain at you. And
yeah. Also, Joe, the apricot thing is a tanker thing.
It must have been before my time. I never heard that one.
Okay. Carrie, what kind of weird coasty superstitions are there?
I mean, I was going to say, like, I mean, one of them is, one of the most infamous ones is, all the crossing ceremonies. So when you cross the equator, when you cross, the Arctic Circle, whatever, particularly with the equator, you join, Poseidon's court, and there's, traditionally like a crossing ceremony, and, so all the pollywogs who have never crossed before, even if it's you're a more senior officer or something, technically you get hazed, and I mean, they've toned it down a lot, compared to like a lot of the shit they used to do. I mean, as they have across all the branches, and it's a good thing. But you get dunked in, you get I mean, I've all sorts of shit happens to you. You can get like fucking like stripped and like run through the boat and just like like put in a fucking cargo net and like all sorts of shit. So I mean, that's definitely one of them. And I mean, like, and similarly, like all the dudes I know who got like very serious like traditional like maritime like nautical tattoos, like in particular I'm thinking of like one dude I know who was from an island who got like you get a rooster and a pig on each foot because apocryphally those were the only animals that would survive during a shipwreck because they were usually wooden crates, and so the crates would float, the animals would survive, and those would be what would break open on like a nearby island, and so they would survive. So I saw like a lot of guys who would get that, or like if they had some sort of waiver trying to get like hold fast tattooed on them or something, even though like you were a fucking like YN or something, you never handled a fucking line, so like I don't know, what are you holding fast, like a fucking form or something?
Hold that clipboard.
Yeah, I mean the one that always gets me though personally is I had a couple of my buddies when I was in Gloucester, and there's the line from was it Groundhog Day with Bill Murray where he has the line like, I don't think the heavy stuff's supposed to come down for some time, and and then like the snowstorm happens, and that's why he gets caught in Puxatawny. But one of my friends said that one time, and then when we were doing like a touch a boat day for like some local like community like outreach event, and and then the fucking clouds came, just like black clouds over the horizon, the fucking sky fell, like it was just torrential downpour, fucking like surf, like fucking lightning storm, like all this shit. And so forever after, we just absolutely forbid him from saying the line like heavy stuff is not supposed to come down for some time or whatever the fuck it is, because Lord knows we just saw that was that was our own personal curse saying.
It's always interesting seeing how many of these things like spread, but I mean the soldiers are just soldiers, sailors, whatever, airmen, they're all incredibly superstitious. If you have your own military superstition that we didn't cover, Please send it in. It'll be interesting. I'd like to read how dumb some of these are.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like I would love to actually do an entire episode just about military superstitions because there's 100% like enough material there for all the different shit people have done over time.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting. Yeah, send those in.
We'll send them in. We'll put something together. Guys, I gotta go. We've been talking for so long. I'm so tired.
Anyway, so Francis is old, and
I'm so old.
All right. Anyway, guys, thank you for joining me today. And until next time, do not march up mountain in the winter, I guess.